Hey VC, it's Matt again, and I just did an entry for Ben Simpson's 500 subscribers contest, I believe it was, and he wants you to pick an artist or a band and name your favorite 5 albums by them and your favorite 5 songs. So check that out and enter his contest, and check out his channel if you haven't, Ben Simpson. Right now I'm going to do a second contest entry. There's someone on the VC named the Jebdude, 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 all one word. The Jebdude, actually. It's a younger kid. He's pretty new to the VC, I believe, but he's doing his 150th subscriber contest, and thought this was kind of a fun and interesting contest. He wants you to name 6 albums that changed your life in a sense, or had a huge impact on your life. So I thought that'd be fun, so I picked out the 6 albums, and so let's get started. Much of this, people watching my videos, is probably not going to be a huge surprise, but be kind of fun to do. So number 1, this obscure little band from Liverpool, England. Like I said, I was a little kid when the Beatles broke up. I was about 6, kind of aware of them because of older brothers, and cousin lived around the corner and stuff, listening to them. Kind of, even though I was aware of them, I remember Hey Jude, I remember Strawberry Fields, and some of the other songs somewhat. Even though I was aware of them, I didn't really tune into them until about 1973. I was in 3rd grade, and my brothers had bunch of their albums, and you saw them around the house all my life and so forth. Sure, I heard them on the radio quite a bit, but just didn't really pay much attention to them. But one day in 1973, some kid from down the street, I don't remember his name, he moved away decades ago, but we were out running around playing. It started raining, so we went to my house, and we were just hanging out and playing games or watching Speed Racer or whatever. And we had one of those old stereos where you lift the top up, the big old, like a piece of furniture stereo, where you lift the top up and all. He went over there and started going through my brother's records, and he started playing Three Dog Night album, and then Led Zeppelin 2. And I thought those songs were pretty cool and all. But while he was doing that, I was flipping through albums, and I ran across this, which I was familiar with because I'd always seen it around the house. But it's, I guess, like I said, I've said this before, it's kind of like if your parents bought a picture and hung it up in your house before you were born, and you just kind of grew up with that picture there and walked by it every day, and then one day somebody in your house and says, "Hey, that's a really neat picture," and you look at it kind of for the first time. So I put this on. First song, of course, is title song, Magical Mystery Tour. My head just exploded, and from that day on, I've been Beatle crazy. My favorite band of all time. Played the album just over and over. A friend of mine that was over there, I guess he wasn't as crazy about the Beatles because he tried to put Three Dog Night on again, and I kind of told him, well, it's time for you to go home. And I played this the rest of the night, and then I dug around and found the other copies of the other Beatle albums my brothers had, like Revolver and Hard Day's Night and Rubber Soul and stuff. And pretty soon after that, I was out buying, being 9 years old, when my parents would buy me a Beatles album. And so it's been a long 40-something year journey, 43-year journey, even though I was aware of them before that. I remember a couple of girls across the street that were a little bit older sitting on the curb singing Hey Jude. Would have been when it was new and all, but this was the one that really did it, that got me into it, that just blew me away, and obviously the Beatles. So that'd be one of the 6, 5 to go. This is another band that, of course, is a big 60s band, and they're still around. Not sure why they're still around, but they're still around. And I was aware of them too, somewhat in the same way I was aware of the Beatles. You know, Satisfaction and Honky Tonk Woman and stuff like that. I was familiar with those songs. I didn't really tune into them initially till much later. I remember even when I was probably in 5th grade, I think, is when It's Only Rock and Roll came out. 1975 is when that album came out, and that was, title song of that was all over the radio. Wasn't crazy about that song, still am not. But I remember being kind of confused because I knew they were a '60s band like the Beatles, and I wasn't really sure if they were still together or broken up. And I knew sort of knew who Mick Jagger was, but that's about it. I didn't know that much about them. So around 1976, a buddy of mine in school, he happened to get a copy of their then latest album, Black and Blue, for his birthday or Christmas or something. He didn't like it. He happened to say, "Hey, you want this album?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm kind of interested in finding out about the Rolling Stones." Took Black and Blue home, played it, and I was like, "The hell is this crap? This doesn't sound like Satisfaction." So, uh, kind of tossed it aside and forgot about the Rolling Stones temporarily. Now that album, well, it's still a piece of crap, but occasionally every once in a while, I'm kind of in the mood to listen to it, like once every 4 or 5 years, and then I listen to it and think, "I was in the mood to listen to this album because it sucks." But anyway, so around about, I don't know, I want to say 77, 78, I hear the song Ruby Tuesday on the radio, which surely I had heard before when I was a little kid because it was a #1 song, I believe. But I don't remember ever having heard it before then. That song just knocked me sideways. And there was a record store in downtown Fort Worth, and got my dad to take me down there. Like the next weekend. Looked around, I found the 45 Ruby Tuesday, took it home, and played it and played it and played it. And then I flipped, looked on the other side. There's a song called "Let's Spend the Night Together." So what's this thing? Turn that on. I'm like, holy cow. So then I really got into the Rolling Stones, and this was the first album of theirs that I bought, which would have been probably around 70, 77, I guess, somewhere in that time frame. And then not too long after that, well, I guess next year actually, but Some Girls came out and "Miss You" was all over the radio, which is probably their last great song in my opinion. And so I really got into that, and I got the Some Girls album, but started buying Rolling Stones albums, the '60s stuff, Aftermath, Between the Buttons, Beggar's Banquet, all that good stuff. And also around that time, '79, there was a book, I still have a copy of it over here, called Up and Down with the Rolling Stones, that came out. That's these wild tales of debauchery by Brian Jones and Keith Richards and company, which was a lot of fun to read back when you were, whatever I was in ninth grade, 14, 15 years old. How much of that book is fact and how much of it is stretched truth, I don't know, but it was sure a lot of fun to read. So, but this is the first Rolling Stones album I ever had, except for that copy of Black and Blue. So that's number 2, 4 to go. Another '60s band, and you all know what's coming if you watch my videos, that I'd always heard of, and I was familiar with Lola, and I was familiar with You Really Got Me, but I didn't really know anything about the band otherwise, and didn't even know if they're still together. But I remember seeing the Kinks' Greatest Hits album, the album that came out in '66 or '7. Sometimes thinking maybe I ought to pick that up just to see what this band's about. I never did. One day in 1980, in the summer of 1980, I walk into Sound Warehouse on the new record rack, all the new records on the side cap there. See this day glow colorful thing staring back at me, and I think, well, maybe it's time to buy a Kinks album, not really knowing anything about them other than You Really Got Me, Lola, and probably All Day and All of the Night. Took this home, and 16, like the Beatles, like the Rolling Stones, just completely blown away by them. And they quickly became and remain to this day my second favorite band of all time behind the Beatles. And they're the only band, really, that comes close to the Beatles, in my opinion. Maybe James Brown in some ways, or Otis Redding, but band-wise, the Rolling Stones are great, but they're leagues below the Beatles in the overall. And the same with the Who. I mean, the Who are great, but the Kinks are 1,000 times better. So this quickly became my second favorite band. And as luck would have it, Cream magazine came out with a story on the Kinks in the next issue, or the issue that came out right around the time of that album, that talked about all their '60s albums, or all their albums up to 1980. And so that got me to go and out and buying all the '60s Kinks albums. And Second Kinks album I bought was Village Green, which is my second favorite album of all time. So that's that. Okay, so we're up to we're at the halfway point. All right, this one, and I've got some albums by them, but I just grabbed this because it's kind of a neat thing. If you can see that, Sly and the Family Stone. This is a box set of their first, I think it's their first first 6 or 7 CDs. It was kind of a limited edition thing. It's still sealed because I was going to open it, but it sold out pretty quick, I think. And this has been out of print this is about 10 years ago this thing came out. It's been out of print forever, so it's probably collectible. And I have these albums anyway. So, yeah, I'm a huge fan of soul music, and even before I guess I'd heard Sly and the Family Stone on the radio when I was a kid, somewhat. Uh, like the Beatles, like the Stones, like the Kinks, heard it, just didn't really tune in. But this was, I love the Motown stuff already, probably, but this is what really got me into funk and soul music, and then of course getting more into Marvin Gaye and Otis Redding, Sam Cooke, and James Brown, and Prince later on, and so I don't know, no specific album in there. His first what is that, 2, 4, 5? His first 5 albums are 10, 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 all the way. Fresh is probably like a 9. Small Talk's probably like an 8 or so, but all great stuff. And his premiere album is Sergeant Pepper, if you will, is There's a Riot Going On, which is a great album, impeccable album. Not always the cheeriest album, but I actually like the 4 albums that came out before that a little bit better. But with those first 4 or 5 Sly and the Family Stone albums, you can't go wrong. And that sort of served as my entryway into, even though I'd already kind of liked quite a bit of the Motown stuff that I'd heard on the radio, but into soul music and all that good stuff. So then, around 1976, I guess, there's a thing called the Parade magazine, which comes out in our Sunday paper probably before I was born, as long as I can remember. And I think it actually is like a little supplement magazine. I think it's in papers all over America because I've seen it when I've been out to California and been to Chicago and so forth. And it's just kind of a little fluffy, like little 10-page newspaper magazine thing each week. Some of y'all probably know what I'm talking about. So I'm looking through that, and I'm going to say 76 or 77, somewhere in there. Summertime, I remember that. And in there's a little blurb, little article about this shocking new thing called punk rock music. And they had a picture of, I don't know if it's probably Sid Vicious, maybe Johnny Rotten, and these wild punk rock bands, and they've got mohawks and safety pins on their clothes, and they've got crazy names like the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the Ramones, and kind of thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And thing was, they didn't play them on the radio. And up to that point, I don't know why. I mean, in Fort Worth, Texas, they didn't, or Fort Worth and Dallas, they didn't. I don't know what New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, maybe they did, but they didn't down here. And it was kind of weird because up to that point, when new music would come out, new rock and roll music, bands, whatnot, they would get played on the radio. But then when punk and new wave came out, I have no idea why they didn't, but they just didn't play it. And of course, this was, like I said, 76, 77, so you couldn't get on YouTube or get on Amazon.com or the internet or whatever because none of that stuff existed. And I remembered even seeing the Sex Pistols album, Nevermind the Bollocks, in Sound Warehouse and Peaches, and considered buying it just to see what it sounded like. But of course, like I said, this was when I'm 13, 14 years old, so I don't have a lot of money. So what money I did have to buy on albums, I tended to buy like Beatles and solo Beatles and Rolling Stones and The Who or whatever. So bands that I knew, or because I'd heard them either on record or on the radio. So I didn't, every once in a while I'd take a chance on something I didn't know, but I didn't do that too often because I just didn't have the money to spend. You didn't want to spend $6 on an album and say, oh, it's a piece of crap. What did I just wasted that money? I didn't actually end up hearing the Sex Pistols till probably 1980, three or so. But anyway, so the Clash, the Sex Pistols, Ramones, all that, you heard about them, but you didn't hear them. I remember a buddy of mine in like seventh, eighth grade. He was talking about them, and he was big into like ELP and Led Zeppelin and stuff. I like Led Zeppelin, all right. I was never that big on ELP, but it's okay. And he was talking about them, and or I said something about them, or he said whatever, and he said, "Oh yeah, they suck." And I said, "Oh yeah, the Sex Pistols." So what do they sound like? He said, I don't, I never heard them. I was like, "You never heard them, but they suck." He goes, "Yeah." So, okay. Then I get into ninth grade, and it was kind of a shock because there were kids there that listened to that stuff, that listened to like Devo and this sort of new wave punk rock. And back then, it was all sort of synonymous. I mean, I remember back then when early on, some people thinking that like Huey Lewis or stuff like that was punk rock. But anyway, slowly the radio station started playing a little bit of that stuff, but it was stuff like the Cars and the Talking Heads and the Police, which the Police are terrible, but at least they were different sounding, and the Pretenders got some play and stuff like that. So you started hearing this new music, and it was kind of weird and different sounding, but it was very cool, and I got into that. Well, I was also during this same time devouring Rolling Stone and Relics and Cream and Trouser Press and all those music magazines. And Rolling Stone sucked even back then, not as bad as it does now, but I mean, it was a little bit better. But Cream was great, and Trouser Press was great, and Relics was pretty cool, and all that. And they would be talking about all these bands like the Sex Pistols and the Jam and the Squeeze and yada 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 and the Clash and how great they were. So I finally there was this TV show called Friday. I don't know if anyone remembers that. It was a Saturday Night Live that's been around for like 100 years. Friday was like a knockoff of Saturday Night Live, and it's remembered nowadays, if it's remembered at all, because Kramer was on it. This was, of course, like 8 or 9 years before the Seinfeld show, but it was just sort of a sketch comedy show like Saturday Night Live, and they had musical guests, and they had the Clash on there, and I thought, oh, yeah, I'm going to check them out to see what they, you know. And so they came and they played this song called Train in Vain. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And that was about the time that London Calling had just come out. So I marched down to the record store shortly thereafter. I used to have this on vinyl. Sadly, I don't have it now other than on CD. And I bought this thinking, and it was a double album, so it was like $11, something like that. I don't remember, thinking, well, if it sucks, I wasted $11, but I'm going to give it a take a chance and see. And this sounded incredibly strange and different and weird back in 19 and 70. It came out at the very end of 79, but 80 really. Which is kind of funny because now it just sounds like rock and roll to me, but it sounded strange, different, and weird, but in a good way. And I kept going back to it, and I fell in love with it. And the Clash would be in my top 5 bands. I might like them more than I do the Rolling Stones, to be honest. But anyway, so that kind of got me into that. And then shortly thereafter, one of the radio stations for a summer just played all new wave and sort of punk, and then MTV came along, and there was this brief time of like a 2-year period when MTV was fun, and then it sucked horribly there ever after. But a lot of new fun, goofy new wave and punk bands and all that. So the other one that followed was another band I kept reading about in Trouser Press and Cream, saying that they were great, and never heard them on the radio. Finally heard one song on the radio by them, thought it was really cool, but I didn't know the name of it. But I went to the record store and decided to take a chance on them. Ended up buying this album I'm about to show. Didn't have the song I heard on the radio. Later on, I figured out which song it was. It was on another album, and I ended up getting that album too later, and ended up getting all their albums. And this is my favorite album. I did my favorite albums of 1980, my top 25, I think it was. And this is my number one album in 1980, and it's the number one album of the 1980s, that decade. And I would rank this as my third favorite album of all time, and my third favorite band of all time. But this is one back in the day when you just, you know, when you fell in love with an album and just played it over and over and over for weeks or months, and this was one of those. Purple Rain. This was from 1980. Purple Rain came out in '84. Was another one. The Beatles albums and the Kinks albums and stuff. But anyway, so that's my 6 albums that changed my life, so to speak. I could easily have done 10, 20, 25, but it's probably a good idea that you kept them at 6 there, Jebdude, because otherwise I'd get carried away, and I've already gone 20 and 21 minutes almost here. So everybody enter Jebdude's contest. Check out his channel and videos, and check out Ben Simpson's channel and videos, and enter his contest of the 5 favorite albums and songs of a band or singer. Have fun, and we will see you all later.